Hi, I'm Kayla. Imagine you're sitting in a jail cell feeling very sick, but a guard just told you that you can't receive medical attention because there are not enough doctors working in that prison. You suddenly feel hopeless, but you're used to it because you've seen it happen to another inmate before. That is just a glimpse of what it's like every day in United States prisons. Prison conditions are just getting worse and worse every day in the United States. According to the Justice Department, approximately a dozen inmates die behind bars each day, or roughly 4,400 per year. The current prison conditions will eventually cause the death rates in the United States to skyrocket. Prisoners are being mistreated for no reason, do not have access to education or rehabilitation, and are barely receiving medical attention. So today, I want to awaken you to the terrible conditions in United States prisons. My first point is prisoners are being mistreated by the people who are working in the prisons for no reason. The pain that the guards are inflicting on prisoners is cruel and unusual punishment. According to the book Just Mercy, inmates at some facilities would be chained to hitching posts, their arms fastened above their heads in a painful position where they'd be forced to stand for hours. To me, that is just not right. No one should be treated that way. Also, if other guards see this happening, then they will think it's appropriate to do it too. For example, if one guard sees another guard mistreating a prisoner, then they will start doing it as well. Then all the guards will eventually think that this type of action is the right way to treat prisoners. Once you start doing something like that, it becomes part of your routine, and routines are hard to break. The next point I like to make is most inmates do not have access to education in prison. Prisoners who focus on education are less likely to commit another crime. According to the article College for Criminals, a random analysis of 58 studies concluded that inmates who participated in these programs were 43% less likely to return to a life of crime. This means that if prisoners are more educated and do not go back to prison, then people will not have to pay thousands of dollars for that inmate if they do not go back to prison. And every time a person goes back to prison, you have to pay a certain amount of money, and that amount of money could go to the education for the prisoner. Having access to education could also help prisoners get a job when they get out, and most of them will eventually get out. In the same article, the author states nearly 95% of the incarcerated are eventually released back into society. For example, once prisoners are released back into society, they will commit another crime because that is all they know how to do if people do not provide them with education. In addition to my last point, inmates also do not have access to rehabilitation. Most inmates suffer from mental illness, and if they cannot get the help they need, then they will most likely be arrested again. According to the article, mental health care for prisoners could prevent rearrest, but prisoners aren't designed for rehabilitation. Estimates suggest that as many as 26% of state and federal prisoners suffer from at least one mental illness, compared with 9% or less in the general population. And prisoners with untreated mental illnesses are more likely to be arrested again after they are released. This means that if prisoners do not get the real rehabilitation that they need, then their condition will continue to get worse. Also, they might become homeless because they will not be able to hold down a job with a mental illness that should have been treated in prison. This is a problem because there is already a large homeless population, and the mentally ill will die over there without food, water, or proper care. And most homeless people already have a hard time finding a job, so imagine how hard it is to find a job with a mental illness too. Now let's consider the medical aspect in United States prisons. I had a picture, but it's not showing. Prisoners barely receive medical attention, if any, in prison. Most people, including doctors, just do not care about prisoners. According to the article, Unprecedented Doctor Shortage at California Prison Hurting Inmate Care, audit says, according to the report, medical staff at the prisons struggle to respond quickly to emergencies, properly review medical records, maintain oversight of inmates receiving opioid-based medication, and arrange medical appointments for new inmates. This means that if inmates do not get the medical attention they need, then prisoners are going to start dying at an alarming rate. Also, some doctors do not want to risk getting sick themselves, and they cannot handle the workload of 2 medical providers during their shifts. For example, most doctors don't want to work in prisons because the conditions are so bad. So the doctors that do work in prisons have to take on an extra workload. That extra workload could eventually lead to doctors making mistakes because they are so overwhelmed with the amount of work that's being given to them. In conclusion, the conditions in United States prisons are getting worse and worse every day. Prisoners are being mistreated for no reason, have no access to education or rehabilitation, and they do not receive proper medical attention. The guards mistreating the prisoners is cruel and unusual punishment. Also, the lack of education, rehabilitation, and medical attention is going to cause prisoners to either become homeless or just end up right back in prison. A prisoner or not, no one deserves to be treated this way. So before we do something that's bad or against the law, just think about sitting in that jail cell feeling sick and hopeless.
So, Crystal, a few words. Oh, that's one of our people who's missing, apparently. Well, that could happen. Stranger things have happened, but I couldn't tell you what they are at the moment. What's that?
I took notes if you wanted somebody else.
No, that's okay.
Anybody else not signing?
All right. Kayla, the greeting is okay with the negative visualization. I think the negative visualization is a pretty effective way of getting the audience's attention. I do think you need a little bit more energy when you're presenting it, especially at the beginning, to pull us in. The issue of problems in prison, I think you identify that as the topic. You've got a nice justification because of the number of people who are dying on a daily basis there. You do kind of preview what the structure is going to be. I thought that that was fine. And like I said, I do think that you have a clear statement of what the purpose of the speech is going to be. It's almost a persuasive in nature, but I do think that you try to keep it on the informative side for the most part. So I thought the opening was pretty successful, with maybe the exception that you need to kind of pump up your energy level a little bit and use a little bit more dynamics in your voice to kind of engage us more. I thought that in the first point you have an example that is pretty dramatic, and it doesn't, frankly, you described it. You said it sounds like it's cruel and unusual punishment. If this is a real case, I'd like to know what happened in this particular case, because that sounds to me like it would be something that would be the basis of a lawsuit. Believe me, there are plenty of groups out there that are advocating on behalf of prisoners about those kinds of issues. And so the question, you make it sound like this is a typical kind of thing, and I don't know that it is typical. It certainly is abhorrent, what you've described, and I think that you need to, if you're going to make that argument, you need to provide us with a little bit more detail about this example. I know you do cite a source on it, but I don't know where the source got this idea either, and I think that we need to, and since it doesn't identify a particular prisoner or a prison or anybody who might have been guilty of doing this, it's apocryphal kinds of stories, and I think you need something a little bit more substantive than that. I think you were a little bit better on the visualization that you had at the beginning of a prisoner not having access to a doctor when they were sick because the doctor is simply not available. Like I said, I thought that you were doing a good job citing sources. Sometimes the information, though, is a little generic in nature. The lack of access to programs, the lack of education, for instance. I have no idea how many prisons have educational opportunities, if any. You just kind of make a generic statement that says that they don't have this, and I don't know that that's true. I think you need to offer some kind of proof on this, and what you have is a little amorphous. It's very vague in regard to that. The structure of the speech is pretty easy to follow in the presentation. I think you need some more specific instances to keep the audience interested in what you're talking about, and you need some more hard data to show that this is a real problem. Like I said, I thought you started off really well with the number of people who are dying each day and the description of some of the things that are going on in the prisons, and then after that it feels a little bit like it's a boilerplate kind of complaint without necessarily providing additional proof or evidence to support those points. The visuals, at best, they provide transition material. They don't really add any content to the speech. I'm thinking, for instance, of an easy way to maybe illustrate this. How many doctors are there on average for a prison? How many patients are they covering? What's the ratio of doctors to patients, for instance, compared to the non-prison population? If you could show that it was overwhelmingly large, that would be a table chart that would illustrate that point pretty effectively, and then make your point very easy to grasp onto and see how true that is. Just a few things like that I think are needed in different places in the speech to make it seem a little bit more substantive. There's a lot of reading going on, and you need to be a little bit more engaged with the audience as well. I thought that you had a pretty good summary, although it did seem like it was repeated twice. I think you could get rid of the first one and go to the second one where you do have the paraphrase of what the content was. All right, thank you.